Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Now today I want to talk all about the inner critic. And I think so many of us struggle with having that internal critical voice that is so judgmental, that's always running us down and really destroys our mental health and takes us away from a place of peace. So I'm going to be really talking all about what is the inner critic, how does it form, and how can we shift it? How can we get rid of that critic? How can we dilute it? How can we feel so much better? So I'm going to talk about some of my own personal experience in dealing with my own inner critic and coming to a much more peaceful place today. So I remember back when I was 23, working in a local pub and desperately saving every penny for my trip to Australia. So I worked the lunchtime shift on a Sunday. It was rammed with drinkers, blurring out the stress of a busy week with a delicious roast and too many pints to be getting in their cars to drive. And orders flew at speed across the bar, and I would be simultaneously pulling pints and adding up the orders in my head, cogs whirring, as mental arithmetic was never my forte. And my stress was palpable. Although I enjoyed the social aspects of pub work, I was hyper vigilant to making mistakes. I really felt, I'm stupid, I'm incompetent, I'm just not good enough. I used to really, really worry about doing these shifts a lot. And sometimes I did get it wrong. I remember, I can still feel this feeling in my body. Like back in the day, I remember someone in the pub giving me a very disdainful comment. It was from this posh older man, something along the lines of, "That girl has no brains." Now, it was a seemingly innocent remark, which really, I look back, it said far more about him than me. It's probably in a bad mood or something and other things going on. And if I had had an internal core of feeling worthy and good enough, that comment would have just rolled off my shoulders and been quickly forgotten. It would have just been lost in many, many memories. But I didn't feel worthy. So I remember the wave of shame that engulfed me in that moment. And then, outwardly I was shiny, thin, youthful, confident, but internally it was a different matter altogether. My inner critic raged with a vengeance, and this one comment had confirmed all my worst fears in one go. I really was stupid, incompetent, and not good enough. And I couldn't even begin to see my strengths back then. Never mind that I connected well with customers and could converse with almost anyone. Never mind that I was conscientious and had an incredible work ethic. Never mind that I was courageous and about to go on a solo trip to Australia. Never mind that I was a loving friend, sister, daughter, and more. Instead, my inner critic ruled my life. So what's the inner critic like? So the inner critic is the judgmental voice in your head. And it exists to protect you, but it can go too far. So as a human, you're designed for survival, and consequently, fear-based thoughts are naturally prominent. 80% of your thoughts are negative, and you'll be searching for that metaphorical bear in the hedge to make sure that you're not eaten alive. And the fact that you and I are here today is due to this survival instinct of our ancestors. It's good in some ways that we have it. But for most of us today, daily life is not a constant threat. There's an extremely high chance that you'll be returning to your home tonight if you go out unharmed and intact. But you may not perceive your life with this assurance and safety though. Your nervous system may be in high alert and your body constantly flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. And you may spend your days overthinking and overanalyzing every detail of your life. And the inner critic will be playing a distinct part in this process. So to understand your inner critic, you need to look to your childhood. If you have extremely strong inner critic, look to your childhood for explanation. Now, already genetically, you may have already been a sensitive soul and a sponge to the terrors of the world, but your environment is also key. The natural human inner critic that we all have can become amplified and exaggerated by your early life experiences. So you will unconsciously internalize influential events and people's feedback. Now, most people come into therapy and describe having a lovely childhood. You may relate to this. And perhaps you're not thinking that. You may be acutely aware of some extremely difficult, adverse childhood experiences you went through, and those memories powerfully infiltrate your consciousness daily. But what if you didn't experience those kind of big T traumas, such as physical abuse or harmful neglect? You might wonder, why could you possibly be struggling with low mood or anxiety or eating disorders or something else? So it's extremely common for people to have experienced the small T traumas, though. Small T traumas can coexist along quite favourable childhood circumstances, such as knowing that you are loved and having your physical needs met. And because of this, they're quite confusing to acknowledge. But small T traumas can be hugely impactful and insidious, such as chronic criticism or lack of interest from a loved one, and the drip cumulative impact of being in an unhealthy environment which didn't encourage your flourishment and self-worth can have devastating and long-standing effects. And it's not just about your relationship with your parents, it's about your bonds with grandparents, wider family, teachers, other significant adults, siblings, friends, etc. Now, really important to say, it's not blaming and demonizing your parents, because it's a fact that most of your parents have likely lived through significant traumas of their own with little or no emotional support or mental health understanding. The stiff upper lip of just get on with it, everything is fine, in the past collective consciousness has meant that people carry unprocessed trauma that they've never acknowledged or dealt with. Instead, it sneakily leaks out daily as they repeat the patterns that are known and familiar. Now, a mental health diagnosis has previously as well carried so much stigma and shame. Back in the day, if anyone was struggling, they would likely be ostracized or labeled as the mad person, and families would do everything and anything to hide what was outwardly considered shameful and wrong. So it means that unless your parents were in the minority and received high quality, emotionally attuned parenting from their caregivers, or they have had a lot of personal therapy, it's almost a given that dysfunctional coping has been reliably passed through the generations. So let's talk a bit more about the inner critic. What's it like? So your inner critic may feel highly personal to you and detached from your past experiences. Even if things have happened to you in the past, you're probably not thinking about the past when your critic is rearing its head day to day. So it lives in your psyche as the gnawing and judgmental voice. And it's an accumulation of negativity in your life experience, tied up with intense emotions such as guilt, shame, self-loathing and disgust, all rammed into a tangled knot. Now, if you have an eating disorder, the inner critic may have a whole voice of its own around food and body image, and you may identify it as the ED voice. Now, this isn't everyone's experience though. The voice can also feel very much part of you rather than a separate entity. Now, the inner critic lives in fear, it doesn't trust the world, it expects the worst case scenario to happen, it predicts catastrophic outcomes, and it channels numerous negative thoughts which later become rigid belief systems which form the scaffolding of your life. It tries to protect you from rejection, abandonment, and not fitting in, but it also spirals you into tunnels of deep shame and desperation where you feel isolated and despairing. But it doesn't have to rule you forever. When you came into this world, you embodied love, you trusted, and you brought your whole self without judgment. Your natural essence being one of love, trust, openness, self-compassion, and joy. Now, inside, you can learn to connect again with your true essence. Now, this isn't about glossing over imperfections and toxic positivity, rather it's coming home to who you are. So how do we dilute the inner critic? I can talk about some different ways. So number one is awareness. So recognize the critic for what it is. It's the ego self here to protect you and keep you safe, but ultimately trapped in a cage of negativity and living small. So take a step back, breathe, and notice just how much it sabotages daily life. The critic is full of fear. The thoughts it channels are not necessarily facts. They're often projections based on stories and past wounding. So appreciate that there is a different way to engage and interpret your life. The universe can be a friendly place. Number two, heal the early wounds. So you need to revisit the roots of early trauma to rewire your brain, reparent, and release your unprocessed feelings. Now, this doesn't mean stewing in the childhood swamp for months on end, but rather doing the therapeutic work that needs attention. And you can find out more about this by listening to my podcast that I did recently about inner child work. So my not feeling worthy was rooted primarily in the father wound and being told consistently that I was incompetent. Now, this came from my dad's own place of pain and a deeply traumatized life. And my mental arithmetic insecurity was also exacerbated by my year 2 maths teacher, who was punishing and unkind. And she would reduce members of the class to tears over an inability to do long division and similar horrible maths challenges. So by understanding the roots of my unworthiness, I was able to revisit these early experiences in a different way. I could recognize that the old stories and emotional interpretations were blocking my ability to thrive today. And I could think about the love and care that I needed to give to that younger version of myself. So number 3, shifting perspective. You can begin to counter your inner critic by developing a different relationship with your thoughts. So rather than simply interpreting even thoughts as facts, you can notice that a thought is simply a thought. It is not necessarily true. You can even challenge the thought with rational alternatives. So you can say things to yourself like, what's the evidence for this? How do I know that this is true? What would I say to a friend? How would I like to think about this? Now, I know when I was back in the bar, I would never have spoken to a valued friend in the way that I spoke to myself. Okay, I probably could have found plenty of evidence actually for other areas of my life where I was good at things. And I could have thought about how I would have liked to have thought about this. I could have been so much kinder in my words and thoughts and actions. Now, if you don't believe your rational thought challenging, it's a signal that the deeper work is ongoing and to look back to your past. If it's an hysterical reaction in the present, it probably has historical roots. So again, you can look back at my recent podcast on inner child work and also my recent podcast on doing deeper healing. Okay, I'm losing track of numbers. I think I'm on number 4. Active self-compassion. Criticizing yourself rarely leads to uplifting outcomes, rather towards demotivation and helplessness. If you're teaching a child to ride a bike, even when they fell off, you'd be encouraging and kind. So offer yourself the same humanity and compassion as you deserve it 100%. Back to my Sunday shifts in the pub, I could have noticed all the wonderful things I had going for me rather than zooming in on the perceived imperfection. And rather than ruminating and overthinking for days, I could have self-soothed, slowed down and returned to my body. The outcome would be infinitely better. Number 5, building my own self-trust. So why take a random comment from an older, drunk man with whom I had no relationship with as a barometer and guide to my self-worth? Zooming out, it seems ridiculous to do this, although it's essentially what I did at the time. So you also might be in the habit of outsourcing your worth and seeking the opinions of others to validate you. So instead, go inwards and build your own self-trust. Self-respect and approval is the only way to win. And this is how inner confidence and self-worth builds. Number 6, soothing creativity and being. As your inner critic softens and your wise, expansive, healthy voice has the chance to emerge, you will find space opening within you to breathe and to expand creatively. Intuition, inspiration, imaginative ideas will start to flow, and you'll become internally grounded with an inner core of worth building rather than relying externally for validation and approval. And I just want to say to you that as someone who used to live completely in a fear-based place of always looking for external validation, I truly feel that today I live in a very grounded present state when I can really express my creativity and be myself. Now, this process takes time. Be kind, be compassionate with yourself on the journey, but know that the inner critic can be diluted significantly to the point that the healthy, flourishing and wise voice directs your life and brings you peace. This is possible for you too. Okay, thank you so much for being here today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would be so grateful if you would follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.